Hi, everyone. Welcome to Kiwi College. I'm Sarah Smith. I'm the editorial director of Kiwi, and I'm really pleased we could all gather together today in honor of Autism Awareness Month and hear from one of the top experts in the field, Dr. Martha Herbert. She's an assistant professor of neurology at Harvard Medical School. She's a pediatric neurologist at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, and she's the director of the Transcend Research Program on Neurodevelopmental Disorders. She really knows a lot about what we're going to be talking about today, and she's also the author of the new book, The Autism Revolution, which I highly recommend, and which 3 of you are actually going to win today, and we'll let you know by the end of the week if you're one of those winners, and I hope the rest of you go out and get it. It's really informative and interesting. But before I turn things over to Dr. Herbert, I do also want to let everyone know that she'll be taking questions at the end, which is really great. So you can type them in at any time, and I'll be, taking a look at those, and we'll get to just as many of them as we can after her talk. So, Dr. Herbert, thank you so much for being here. Please take it away.
It's my total pleasure to be here with you and everyone. And what I'm going to talk with you about is the Autism Revolution 10 tips. So I'm going to explain to you what my frame of reference is. That's explained in much more detail in the book with stories. And I'm going to give you 10 tips that summarize some key points. So if you notice, the subtitle of my book is Whole Body Strategies for Making Life All It Can Be. And on this slide, I point out that there are whole body, whole system features of autism. Autism is defined as a behavioral condition, but it's actually it actually also includes a series of other parts of the body that are affected: seizures, cognitive issues, sensory motor, and sleep, immune, GI, rashes, food allergies, systemic metabolic disturbances. Many people with autism have one or several of things on the above list. And I'm going to talk with you about how to approach autism that includes these in the overall approach. Now, that list of issues beyond the brain, we can call it multi-system. And if you look back on the very first paper where autism was named by Leo Kanner in 1943, there were 11 cases, and just about every single case had medical problems. And in this slide, you can see the highlighting in red of the medical things that were going on in each of the cases: eating, diarrhea, fever, infections, malnutrition, even hormonal problems. But what really would have deflected people back then from focusing on them is that they were different from one person to the next. But if you zoom out, you see that, number one, they're chronic, and number two, they involve regulation problems, too much or too little, not being able to handle certain bodily functions very well. And so what I'm going to be talking with you about is in an approach here. This is an iceberg, clearly, and there's a ziggurat model of autism which talks about what we see on the surface, the visible symptoms. That's what we've been talking about when we consider autism a behavioral disorder. But there are a lot of underlying functional disturbances, and they're the underpinnings or the architecture of what we see with our social eyes and our social brain. And when you take a whole body approach, you are accounting for the underlying functional issues and not just the visible symptoms, because sometimes helping things at that underlying level can make the visible symptoms a lot better. There's a new model emerging of autism. When I got into the field 15 or 16 years ago, it was considered a genetically caused brain impairment. But now we're moving toward a gene environment medical obstruction of brain function rather than a broken brain. Not a broken brain, an obstructed brain. And here are some of the things that have been changing people's mind about what autism is. Not just genetic, because the numbers are going up. Even if some of that's greater awareness, some of it is a real increase. It's not just brain, because there are systemic features in the whole body. It's not just brain modules, because there's whole brain involvement, and the brain tissue has changed. There's brain inflammation. There's brain oxidative stress. There's tissue changes. And it's not necessarily hardwired, because people with autism get a lot better. Some of them improve temporarily when they have a fever or when they're just taking fluids before a procedure. And some of them get really 10 to 20% lose their diagnoses. So all of these things are changing our fundamental assumptions about autism spectrum disorder. And when I say it's not just behavior, these are the levels that are involved. So before in the slide with the iceberg, I said there are things going on underneath, and now this slide is kind of upside down. So on the bottom, you have behavior, learning, social interaction, and creativity. By the way, can you see my cursor moving around? That would be nice to know. But in any case, the genes and environment, pardon me?
We can see you moving and pointing.
Awesome, good. So I have a pointer. So the genes and environment, the chemistry, the cells, the organ, and the wetted part, the brain, these are all under the surface, but they're going the same way the engine in a car goes, but you don't see that when it drives down the street. And the function of all of these underlying levels shapes what behaviors are produced, how learning works, how social interaction goes, and what kind of creativity there is. So again, it's a whole body system. So 10 tips. So what I'm going to go through now is 10 tips that walk you through all of those levels and how you can deal constructively with each of them. First is go for the extraordinary. People with autism can be amazingly brilliant and creative. They can have areas where they function better than neurotypicals, perceptual capacities that go beyond what neurotypicals can usually produce. We used to think that 40 to 70% of people with autism were mentally retarded, but new data is suggesting that maybe only 5 or 10% are mentally retarded, and it's partly because we were using tests that don't work so well with people with communication issues. Using more visual tests, you get a much higher IQ in many cases. So rejoice in your child's strengths and shore up their vulnerabilities. Tip number two, know what you can't control and what you can. We can't change our genes. They're important. They shape who we are. But we can change our environment. We can change what we eat, the products we use, how we use our time, our levels of stress when we, at least in some ways. And all of these environmental things in our lives impact gene expression. That is, what genes get turned on and what genes get turned off. So even though you can't change your genes, you can even change your gene expression, and you can change many other things. So focus on what you can do. Number 3, repair and support cells and cycles. Everything we do relies on our cells. Environment can help or injure our cells. And everything in our cells comes from what we eat. Is your child's food nutrient poor? Is it processed food? Does it come from boxes? Is it full of pesticides? You can move toward giving your child a nutrient-flooded, non-toxic diet. Fruits and vegetables, things as they've been grown, meats, unprocessed meats and fish and poultry, nuts, many colors during each day, the rainbow diet. Another type of diet is the paleo diet, which is basically unadorned food that hasn't been depleted by food processing. High nutrient density, a lot of nutrients for each calorie consumed. Cell problems are a big deal in autism spectrum disorder. Metabolic dysfunction, now metabolism is the hidden chemical machinery that's going on every microsecond of every day that keeps us going. And in medicine, in my training, I was taught to learn to find errors in metabolism that come from genes. But now we know that metabolism can be changed due to environment, even if the genes are not mutated. To avoid these problems, avoid toxins as much as you can. Try to use natural cleaning products, natural cosmetics. Get lots of antioxidants from fresh fruits and vegetables and supplements, but particularly from fresh fruits and vegetables. There's no substitute for the food part of it. Very important. Another problem that some of you may not know what mitochondria are, but we all know that our bodies need energy. And the mitochondria are where the sugars are turned into energy that we can use. Maybe 7% of people with autism have identifiable reasons for mitochondrial dysfunction, genetic reasons, but maybe 1 out of 3 or even more have problems with their mitochondria because mitochondria are very environmentally vulnerable. That's one of the mitochondria are taking a hit in many of the chronic diseases that are getting so common: obesity, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, asthma, and autism. Again, to protect your mitochondria, avoid toxins, get lots of antioxidants, lots of beautifully colored, multicolored fresh fruits and vegetables, and supplements as necessary. Tip 4, get gut and immune systems on your side. Gut and immune are organs and systems in our body that bridge our body with the outside world. We take in food through our gastrointestinal systems, and our immune system decides what things that get into our body are safe and what need to be fought off and gotten rid of. In autism spectrum disorders, there's a lot of gastroesophageal reflux, or GERD. There's a lot of diarrhea, a lot of constipation, and more. And in the immune department, there's a lot of allergies, recurrent infection, and autoimmunity. It's really important to avoid allergens when you can, and you may or may not know what allergens affect your child. You can have your child tested to find out what foods and other things they're allergic to. But there's also ways that children can be sensitive to food, and if you're suspicious, you can do an elimination trial, and 1 or 2 foods at a time are probably safe to do on your own. More than that, you need medical supervision. Elimination just means get it out of the diet and keep it out for 3 weeks, and then see what happens when you reintroduce it. Don't change other things during that time. The healthy organisms in fermented foods like sauerkraut and in yogurt and in probiotics help our immune systems function better and help our gut function better. And so those are things that it's useful to take. Also lots of healthy fiber, and avoid toxins yet again, including unnecessary food additives. Number 5, build better brain health. I've been going through the first 4 tips to talk about the systems of the body, the genes, the chemistry, the cells, and the organs. The brain is an organ of the body. The brain is wet, and it's attached to the body. It's not just a computer. It has blood vessels and fluids and cells and bones and all kinds of things in there. The brain can get physically ill. That's important. The physical illness can affect brain function, and these brain health problems can potentially get better. The reason I'm talking about this, it's not just abstract. Inflammation has been identified in brain tissue from people with autism. This has been in at least 4 studies by now. And gene expression for the cells associated with the inflammation is increased in autism too. And healthy cells and organs can help that inflammation be less severe. So very important to think about the brain's physical health. Healthier brains have more bandwidth. Now, we all know the bars on our cell phones, and you know that if you have 2 bars out of 5, you have limited reception, and it's hard to hear or communicate. With lots of bandwidth, there's good reception. What I'm telling you is that when your child's body is healthy, the brain gets healthier, and you have more reception, more bars, more channels, and good reception allows learning. You don't have to go over things over and over again. The improvement becomes more spontaneous. Tip 6, calm brain chaos. Brain functions get confused from brain overload, and a brain whose cells are struggling is overloaded more easily. Here are some of the overload issues that come up in the brain, and notice I managed to find a way of labeling them with words that start with S. Sensory overload. The noise bothers. The fluorescent lights bother. The brain is hyperreactive to sensory input, and things that a typical person wouldn't notice are too much for a person with the significant sensory issues like in autism. Sensory motor issues like clumsiness, hypotonia, sloppiness. Sleep problems are incredibly complicated. Sensory issues are nearly 100%, and sleep issues are pretty close. Seizures occur in maybe 20 to 40%, but abnormal brain waves associated with seizures, but not fully seizures, are probably going on in the majority of people with autism. And that interferes how the brain can process. It's like a giant source of static in the brain. When you have that static, speech and language takes a hit, and even if you don't have seizures, speech and language, sociability, and stress are all harder to perform when the brain is overloaded. The environment in this situation becomes out of sync with a challenged brain and a challenged nervous system. And the person experiences that there's too much noise, too much speed, and too much stress. So what you can do to help calm brain chaos is to take it slow. Do half as much in twice the time. As my friend Anat Banyel says in her new book, Kids Beyond Limits, which I also recommend, luxuriate in what you're doing. Really stay with it, and that will give your child's brain time to catch up with what's going on. Tip 7, join your child's world. Narrow, rigid ideas of what is normal create obstacles. Your child may never be normal, but they can be extraordinary. That's what's important. Love your child for who they are now. Don't give them a burden of expectations they can't meet. Look for their strengths, build on their strengths, and build from where they are to expand to broader horizons. Look for the hidden reasons behind what your child does. Challenging or bizarre behavior is usually a signal that something is not right. Hunt for problems in their environment, in the world around them, and in their inner world, within their bodies, where there may be pain, discomfort, infection, poor function, even a broken bone that they don't know how to tell you about. Be vigilant and hunt hard, because all of these things can be what's underlying behaviors that you otherwise would think were just bad. They can really be a call for help. We need to decode the way they call for that help. Tip 8, love, rejoice, and make breakthroughs. Enrich the experience of your child. Build bridges between your way of experiencing and theirs, and let them build bridges between their ways of experiencing and yours. And transcend autism. Over time, you will find that you can keep the strengths and lose the pain. Tip 9, lead the revolution. My book is called The Autism Revolution for a reason. We have a lot of things to change to make the world work well for people with autism and for everybody else who would benefit by those changes. As you're learning to make things better, keep track of what you're doing. Teach others and learn from them. Think critically about information that you are told or that you may find on the internet. Advocate for whole body, whole planet research, systems action research, research that makes a difference. Tip 10, do it for yourself, your next baby, and the planet. Learn to look at autism as something that develops, not something that is destined. As it develops, there are many choices along the way where you can add things that make things worse or add things that make things better. So make a concerted attempt to make things better across all of the dimensions you can think of. Start now to improve every aspect of your family's food and environment. And for the planet, visualize a world in which safety is assured. And we don't have to read all the words on a label suspiciously because we don't have to worry about things like that. But meanwhile, you need to be vigilant and work hard. Now, I'm nearing the end of the talk, and I just want to say some of you may be interested in a new website I set up. I have the website autismrevolution.org, and there's another website called autismwhyandhow.org. It's a new website. It's a neutral presentation of the answers for 3 questions. What is autism? What causes autism? And how can we help? And it's a way of finding common ground across the many different, sometimes warring perspectives on autism. Your participation is welcome, and I hope you enjoy the site. If you sign up for the newsletter, I'll inform you of its upgrades to the way the site works. Now, remember that you are not alone. The challenges you're facing with your autistic child or your child with other challenges, they're part of something bigger than you and your child, bigger than autism and neurodevelopmental disabilities. People all over the world are dealing with issues of the environment out of sync with their biological needs. This is a wonderful book called Blessed Unrest, How the Largest Movement in the World Came into Being and Why No One Saw It Coming. As you get involved in the community of people trying to develop answers that work for them from the ground up, you'll see that many different people facing many different problems are engaged in the same kind of shared, collaborative, ground-up problem solving. And this book is a wonderful compendium of that information. To close, this is a quote from Chief Seattle, who gave us very wise advice and a very wise reminder. We are part of the earth, and it is a part of us. We do not weave the web of life. We are merely a strand in it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. The whole world needs an autism revolution to make the world the way we want it to be as we live the life we want. So welcome to the Autism Revolution, and there is my website, our Facebook page, and the Twitter page. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Herbert. Hi, everyone. Again, this is Sarah from Kiwi. Thank you so much for the presentation, Doctor. And I'm looking forward to moving into the Q&A portion. So anyone who's out there who has a question, please send it in. We have a couple to start with here. Dr. Herbert, you talked earlier about the importance of a non-toxic diet, and you also touched on elimination trials for the diet, and you know, that brings me to a question from one of our listeners who wondered if specifically if the gluten-free, dairy-free diet, which is something that I think a lot of us have maybe heard about, is that worth trying? And in her case, she's asking specifically about a nonverbal boy with autism. But if you could talk about, to her question, but also about that gluten-free, dairy-free, or casein-free diet that a lot of people are talking about these days.
Yes, there was a study out of the United Kingdom and Sweden or Norway on the gluten-free, casein-free diet, where they had to stop the placebo arm because the people on the diet were doing so much better. It was unethical not to offer it to the control group. Wow. I personally am very much in favor of doing a serious trial of that diet. And I actually find that going a little bit further than that diet can be even more helpful. There are 2 other diets that include that but add a little bit more. So the gluten and the casein may either be immune irritants, allergy irritants, or cause chemical problems. The specific carbohydrate diet and the GAPS diet, the gut and psychology symptoms, I think that's what it is, the GAPS diet, are also reduce simple starches, the ones that turn into sugars, because there are microbes in your intestines, in your child's intestines, bacteria in particular, and fungi and viruses, that are not so good for you and that thrive on sugars. So these other diets are a little bit more intense. Now, the issue with the diet is you really do need to be strict, because cheating, the immune system is thrown back to its earlier state, and you don't get the benefits of giving the immune system a sustained break from these things that have been irritating it for so long. A researcher who's done some really good work on this is Alessio Fasano, F-A-S-A-N-O, at the University of Maryland. Has a wonderful article in Scientific American a few years ago on celiac disease, and he thinks that gluten sensitivity is common to all psychiatric and all autoimmune diseases. So I think I would recommend a serious trial of it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But you can learn to have a lot of really healthy foods, and you can learn to think of it as things that you're adding to the diet, not things that you're taking away. One particular thing that helps in starting is zinc, to help the taste buds work better so the child is more interested in the other foods.
Oh, is zinc something you add in supplement form then?
You can add it in supplement form, yes. Mm-hmm. And in my book, I have some information about behavioral techniques to help children try new foods that they otherwise wouldn't.
Oh, interesting. Great. I think that answers our next question, though, which was, so does that mean when you're trying these diets that you switch to it 100% immediately, or are you supposed to gradually take kids off of the gluten or the dairy? I mean, it sounds like the benefit is from taking it away entirely, but what do you recommend in terms of getting there?
There's no one right answer to that. It's partly a family preference and partly so some people go through a transitional period. In some of the people in the specific carbohydrate diet world will get rid of the flours right away, but substitute almond flour cookies and breads that are familiar textures to the child. And as the child eats those, then you start introducing more fruits and vegetables. There are a lot of strategies for that. I think the main thing is to get to the goal that you're going to and get to the total elimination part. Don't stay at the only partial elimination part. Okay. But there's no one right answer.
Okay, that's helpful. Moving on to a different topic, you also brought up seizures and the idea that, well, you'll have to explain it further, but that to some children with autism who don't exhibit seizures might have something still in their brain related to it. I'm sure I'm not explaining that properly, but hopefully you will. And that there's a question from somebody who's wondering if she should get her son an EEG to see if he's having seizures, even if he doesn't appear to be having them. So can you explain that further?
Absolutely. I breezed over it. I breezed over it because there really wasn't that much time, but I will dwell on it some more.
Great.
So the cells in the brain are constantly making electrical activity, and when you get an EEG, a brainwave test, you see these little squiggles, and they're really pretty small and frequent, and when someone's having a problem of irritation of the brain, more of the cells start to fire together, and so some of those squiggles turn into little spikes because a bunch more cells are doing it all at once. A spike is not epilepsy, but it is a sign that there may be a little bit of irritation. And a seizure is when that triggers a seizure, and then epilepsy is when you have more than one seizure over time. And epileptiform activity is activity that isn't normal but that hasn't turned into a seizure. So the way neurologists think about this is changing very much right now. When I was trained, we were taught that if a person is not having a seizure, you don't have to worry about the abnormal brain activity. But now we're realizing that some of that may impact a child's learning or functioning. But even so, most doctors would not be too eager to use anti-epileptic drugs to treat it because they have a lot of side effects. if you have if among the things you're willing to try are a really healthy, low allergen diet and certain nutrients, which I talk about a little bit in my book, they don't prevent seizures, but they may help you have less vulnerability to them. So you're taking away the nutrient irritations and you're adding support. Essential fatty acids, omega-3s, like in fish oil, would probably be the single most important thing. You need to make sure it's of good quality, not rancid and well filtered without toxins. But our brains really need that support, and we don't get enough of it in the typical diet. If you go to a neurologist, they may or may not be interested in doing that kind of an EEG depending on your child's symptoms. And at this point, it's in a phase of transition, and it depends on the neurologist. But that's what I can say now, and I can develop more information going forward. There's beginnings of that on my Autism Why and How website, and there's going to be more on that going forward.
That's great. So we can keep an eye on that as people are making those decisions about what kind of treatments to get. Great. You also touched on sleep issues, and so we have people wondering about if there are particular approaches to sleep that work better for kids with autism, or if you sort of have to take a autism-specific approach when you have a child who has sleep issues or doesn't sleep well.
Well, there's a lot of the ways you approach sleep in autism are pretty similar to what you have to do with other people, but you have to work harder at it. Sleep hygiene is very important. Don't give stimulating foods or stimulating cola drinks or caffeine before bed. Do relaxing things and so forth. Beth Mallow, M-A-L-O-W, has some excellent material. And other things that you can do are, melatonin, Epsom salt baths with baking soda, which helps you absorb it. That has magnesium and sulfate, which are very relaxing. But you also need to look for physical problems. Hidden seizures can be an issue, not usually, but sometimes. Gastroesophageal reflux can keep somebody awake. Constipation or diarrhea can keep somebody awake. So you need to be looking for hidden irritants. And that's something where you need to look harder in autism than for other people, because they won't necessarily tell you about these things. And people may interpret the signs of it as behavioral rather than medical. So you need to look hard.
That's a really great reminder. Yeah. That's such a great reminder, that you're doing all the right things, but maybe you're doing it hard. You need to do it, more intensely than you might with another child, and that's great to remember. I'm glad you pointed out on that one slide that you're not alone. You're not the only one having to put in that extra, investigation to help figure out what you can do. Yeah.
Yeah.
To close here with the questions, you also mentioned as a way to make a difference, advocating for systems action research. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about what that means, and if there are actionable ways people, I'm sure, the people on our call who have kids with autism are probably very busy dealing with, all the day-to-day life, but I know a lot of people are wondering also, what else can I do for the community? So if you could talk a little bit more specifically about that, that would be great.
Yeah, this is what my chapter 9 of my book is about. First of all, I think that we need to collect data, and there's emerging computer-based systems like iPhone apps where you can track data and it can be pooled. There's some databases. I mean, I can give a few names. I don't know whether it's appropriate to mention particular products, but
yeah, if they're ones that you recommend, I'd love to
so
hear
like
them.
Autism, I think Autism Track from Handheld Adaptive.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of databases which have some potential, such as Charm Tracker and Autism 360. And I think this is going to evolve going forward. The Patients Like Me has some ways of tracking information, and that's a large system for many different kinds of conditions. I think we need to reverse engineer autism to study how people get better, starting from when they start their treatments, looking at all the different systems that I've gone through in the book, from the cells, the organs, the gut, the immune, the brain. And I think that we need parent-based, community-based research and treatment-guided research, learning from what people do and how it works. When we capture that data and share it with each other, we'll be able to learn how people solve their real-life complicated problems. One of the problems with medical research has been individual problems are isolated, and then but nobody has them one by one. They have them all at the same time, and sometimes there are strategies that work together to solve these problems better in a group than in synergy with each other than separate from each other. Mm-hmm. So I would really, and I have again more on that on my Autism, How and Why, and in Chapter 9 of my book. I think this is having to do, again, with people from the grassroots solving a lot of problems and getting collaboration. As I said, community-based participatory research. So all the stakeholders have a say in how the research is done.
Right. That's great. And it's so great to have those additional resources for people to your website and book. I'm sure there are a lot of people who are going to be going to those to learn and to participate too. So
that's great.
Fantastic. Thank you. It looks like that wraps up our questions that we've gotten coming in. So I want to thank you so much, first of all, Dr. Herbert, for being here and sharing your expertise. And I want to thank the audience for joining us and for your great questions and being part of Kiwi College. And I hope you'll join us in the future too. So thanks again, Dr. Herbert.
And thank you. Thank you. Thank everybody.